Look at this, Jack Hues of Wang Chung. Hi, how are you?
I'm good, Meredith. How are you?
I'm great, thank you. It's so good to have you on the show and lots to dive into.
Mm-hmm.
Let's start with you guys. You guys are going on tour
Mm-hmm.
again, and this time it's the I Want My 80s tour with Rick Springfield, John Waite, John Cafferty, and Paul Young. That is a great lineup.
It is, yeah, yeah, and it's quite a sort of rock and roll lineup. Previous tours we've done have been very focused on 80s bands, and I know it's I Want My 80s, which is when we were all active.
Yeah.
But I think these are rock bands, and it's a privilege for Wang Chung to be a part of that.
Now, how did you get the call about that? I'm curious. How were you invited onto this tour?
Yeah, I guess it's all sort of managers talking to each other. It's at the beginning of the year there were various offers lined up, and I know that we turned down a couple of quite lucrative offers because A, we wanted to be free to do this if it came up,
Yeah.
and B, we just weren't particularly interested in the lucrative stuff. So that gamble paid off, and we did get this show. So this is something we really wanted to do, and yeah, looking forward to it.
Yeah, I'm going to be at the Virginia show in Wolf Trap on July 8th. That's going to be an incredible that venue. Have you been to Wolf Trap, by the way?
Yeah, we've played it before. Yeah, we have. Yeah.
Great backstage area, large, it's awesome. So, outdoor venue, it's going to be
Mm.
beautiful. I can't wait to come see you guys.
No, I love these sort of like the sheds, as they used to be called, where they're sort of like partly open air and but seated as well. It's and they're always, I mean, I love playing in the States because of the levels of professionalism that you get from the crews that work these places and the catering and everybody really, is really on point. It's wonderful.
Wow. Well, that's good to hear. I have not heard that yet before. So it's a kudos to the States for having some cool venues for you to play at. That's nice.
Absolutely, it's geared up for, people love to come out and watch bands and hear their music, and
Yeah.
I say that as someone who's lived in the UK for most of my life, although I now live in Texas. But the UK, I'm not saying people don't go out to hear music, but there isn't quite the same respect, if you like,
Yeah.
for music. And by that I mean not so much respect for the bands, because that's whatever, but respect by the people professionally involved in the business, for their craft and what they do and the importance of what they do to get the show on the road.
Right. Let's back up a little bit. Last year, saw you in DC, Totally Tubular Festival. Thomas Dolby lives 20 minutes from me here in Maryland.
All right. Okay.
I've interviewed Thomas a few times. You had some great people on that. The Tubes. Now, my friend and I went, and I got to tell you, I hadn't had a chance to see you before, right?
Okay.
And these types of shows, let me just say, Jack,
Hmm.
Totally Tubular Festival, I Want My 80s tour. This gives people like me a chance to see bands that maybe I missed out on years
Yep.
ago. It is so cool to be able to put all of you on one stage
Mhm.
and be able to see all of you. Totally Tubular was very cool. I didn't
Mhm.
know what to expect. You guys took the stage, and I'm not just saying this because I'm talking to you. You
Mhm.
blew me away.
Mhm.
It was
Great.
unbelievable. Wang Chung was unbelievable. You
Great.
guys were high energy the entire time. You played the hits. You stuck to what the crowd, I feel like what the crowd wanted.
Yeah.
Is that the same that we can expect on I Want My 80s tour?
Very much so. Yeah, yeah. We have a slightly longer set, so
Nice.
we include. Well, we're going to sort of cycle round a number of songs as the extra song in the set, So that might be Wait or Fire in the Twilight or To Live and Die in LA. I think we're going to play that most sets because A, we love playing it. B, it's the 40th anniversary of To Live and Die in LA this year, and one of the things we're trying to achieve is a show where we use the movie and play the entire soundtrack album. We're getting slightly long into the year to pull this off, but I'm hoping that we're going to be able to do that before the year ends.
Yeah, that was cool that you did a movie soundtrack back in the
Oh,
day.
amazing. Yeah. That was one of the
Amazing.
great things, talk about right place, right time, because
Hmm.
it was unsolicited. Bill Friedkin, who was the director, William Friedkin directed The Exorcist and The French Connection. So he was a very hot director, and totally independent as well, you know. And that was one of the great things about working with him, in that he chose Wang Chung because he loved what we did, you know. So, like all good artists, you know, choosing your materials is, in a sense, getting that bit right is the best thing, you know. So he chose Wang Chung, and then he just said, do what you do, you know, so that we weren't in that situation where you're kind of being, yeah, it's good, but could you do this and could you do that and could you, you know, like, as I have experienced in other sort of movie settings, you know.
Yeah.
And so working with Billy, it was just always yes, you know. And of course, there's the well told, or many times told, story of how I had my initial conversations with him, he said, you know, I want soundtrack material, I want instrumental, like jamming from your band, you know. I don't really want a song called To Live and Die in LA. That's not what I'm after. It's something else, you know.
Mhm.
And after basically doing all the soundtrack stuff and sending that over to him without having seen the movie, we just kind of did it. He loved it and invited us over to see a rough cut of the movie in his studio in Todd AO, that was in Los Angeles. And it was such an incredible experience that when I got back to the UK, this song just kind of came out. You know, I almost felt slightly embarrassed about calling him up and saying, I've written a song called To Live and Die in LA. And he said, well, send it over. And he loved that. And he shot the whole front section of the movie, which is this kind of presidential motorcade sequence, not a cheap thing to film at all, you know. And used it in that, you know. So yeah, it was a great experience working with Billy, and he became a good friend of mine. You know, I used to stay with him a lot when I was in LA, and he passed away a couple of years ago, and I miss him very much.
Mm. And you'll always have that memory. And it
Well,
was great that you
absolutely.
had that freedom to be able to be creative and artistic in the way that you wanted to be.
All artists need that and want that. And when you're
Right.
working in a very commercial business, you know, I mean, of course, one accepts there's a game to play, you know,
Mhm.
and so you have to play that game. But it was a joy working with Billy to have that artistic freedom.
You and Nick have had this career, have had this
Mm.
relationship, this professional relationship for almost 50 years. That
It
is
is.
longer than most marriages, Jack.
It's
How do you make I've got to throw this in, I'm sorry, but like, you know, I've talked to Daryl and John from Hall and Oates, and they always said they were like brothers where they would bicker, but at the end
Mhm.
there was love. And now they've kind of split up. How do
Yeah.
you and Nick make this chemistry and keep it professional, but also keep respect for each other for
Mm.
almost 50 years?
Yeah. Well, I think we get on as people, you know, and we have a lot of respect for each other as sort of creatives, if you like. You know, I think Nick and I fulfill different aspects of Wang Chung. You know, I mean, we don't fight exactly, but we certainly disagree, and go through periods where we're a little cooler with each other than at other times. But essentially, you know, Wang Chung we get is, you know, Jack and Nick, it's a joint project, you know, requires us both to be fully participating, you know.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, I'm working on a new solo album at the moment. I've done two solo albums in the last 5 years, one in 2020, one during the pandemic in 21, and I'm working on a third one now. And you know, that's important for me, you know, to have a bit of oxygen, you know, from the outside world, and to be able to work again with total artistic freedom, you know, because Wang Chung is a thing, you know. If we were going to be doing a Wang Chung recording, you know, we both have to sort of think slightly differently about that, you know. And I don't know whether that's something that's on the cards really. We talk about it, but that's a difficult one, more perhaps more for me than for Nick, you know. But I need that sort of sense that I'm moving on as an artist. I mean, I respect artists who have done that with their careers, you know, sort of. I mean, Miles Davis is obviously the prime example of,
Yeah.
and I don't pretend to be that because obviously I'm, you know, Wang Chung pulls me back to my past in many ways, you know, but nevertheless, the exploratory side of being an artist, I have to have that, you know, and doing different things, you know, it's just important. But Wang Chung is the sort of gravitational center, and coming back to that then feels really good, you know.
Sure. Now you have a new album coming out on May 9th.
Yes.
Clear Light, Dark Matter. You can't call it a greatest hits, right? Because you have the hits, but you have unreleased tracks on there that we haven't heard before, right?
Yes.
Which is
Yeah.
a really big treat for Wang Chung fans to
Yeah.
get some. It's almost essentially like new music, but
Mm.
from the past,
Yes.
right? Bringing it out of the vault, shall
Right.
we say?
Yeah, well, literally in one case, because I mean, we've been working on basically reissuing the albums, the 6 studio albums, for years now,
Mhm.
and that again, it's the line between art and commerce in a sense, so trying to make it work commercially is difficult, making it work artistically is fine, you can dream up the box sets and the deluxe editions and all of that stuff, but making it sort of not that we want to make money out of it sort of thing, but we don't want to lose money out of it. And also it's a bit of a one-shot deal, once you've done it, that's it. And if it's not set in the right context, then you lose all of that energy and stuff, So I guess Clear Like Dark Matter is a great way of setting the ground for Wang Chung. I know that part of what we wanted to achieve was, obviously people know Wang Chung for Everybody Have Fun Tonight, but also Dance All Days, and also To Live and Die in LA, and also the soundtrack to The Breakfast Club, Fire in the Twilight, Hypnotize
Mhm.
Me. I think the experience of seeing Wang Chung live is like, God, I know all these songs and I didn't kind of put them all together, let's go. Well, So yeah, what we wanted to do was sort of say, yeah, Wang Chung is more than just the one, there's not just one hit, there's 6 or 7, you know,
Right.
and that's an important part of Clear Light Dark Matter. But I think it's also this sense of like, yeah, there is a sort of recorded legacy, and going right back to the really early days when we spelt the name differently and we were very much UK based and working there. So there's our first single, which is called Isn't It About Time We Were on TV, which was a very tongue-in-cheek kind of punk track, but it's cool, it's again got all sorts of little Wang Chung signature things in it. And in the process of looking at that first album that we did, which was self-titled Wang Chung, I managed to get hold of the multi-tracks for it, and I was listening through to everything, and I found a track that we recorded at the time but never really finished or released,
Mhm.
So I did a mix of that, and that is on this album as well. So I know there's lots of diehard Wang Chung fans who have a lot of this demo stuff and
Yeah.
that they accumulated over the years, but nobody has that particular track, a track called Separate Lives. So
Is Space Junk on there? I didn't even look.
is it on there? That's a good question.
That's a cool song. I like Space Junk.
Yeah, Space Junk, obviously, that was for The Walking Dead, wasn't it? And more of a sort of 90s track.
Yeah.
Well, we recorded it in the late 90s as on the very first greatest hits album that we did. Geffen invited us, the record label invited us to add a new track to it. At the time, it didn't really do much, but I think 10 years later, it got picked up for The Walking Dead and was like given a very prominent position in the first episode, and loads of people really got into the track then, so
Yeah.
yeah.
It was really cool. Really
Mm.
cool. And it fit in well there. Well,
Yeah.
like you said something. I'm going to go back to this
Yeah.
about being on TV.
Yes.
So I feel like some people made it with their videos and some people missed the beat on that, right? Okay. Dance Hall Days, very cool.
Yeah.
Like old footage, you kept it classy and just kind of kept it to what that song really was about. And then you have Everybody Have Fun Tonight, right? Which was banned in the UK, right? By the BBC, because it's true. If you're watching it, you
Yeah.
know, if
Yeah.
you
No, the
have a
BBC.
medical issue, you could have a problem potentially. They were worried about that. I don't
Well,
think
that's
so,
what they
but
were
like,
worried about. Yeah. I yeah,
who
understand.
came up with the concept for the video for Everybody Have Fun Tonight?
I know Nick and I were really interested in the sort of stop motion stuff that was like Peter Gabriel's Sledgehammer, was a
Yeah,
great example,
yeah.
And I think Nick and David, our manager at the time, went to the Czech Republic, Czechoslovakia as it was then, and met with this guy who had done some of the stop motion stuff, you know. I didn't get to go for some reason, you know. But anyway, there was always this sense that we wanted something that was kind of jump cut stuff, you know. And then we met with Kevin Godley and Lowell Cream, who were the kind of top video guys at the time, you know.
Mm.
And they came up with this idea of the sort of wooden box and, you know, just doing multiple takes with me singing the song as still as I possibly could, basically, you know. It was incomplete. I was watching the video to Fire in the Twilight recently, you know, where I'm running along Ventura Boulevard. That was exhausting to do. But Everybody Have Fun Tonight was just like stand in front, you know, the camera's right on my face, and it's just like I sang the song like 6 times and tried not to move, you know. But of course you do move, and that's what gives you all that kind of slightly flickery stuff. And some poor guy had to do the editing for that in like with proper film. You know,
And think about it, doing it back then. Woo,
yeah, so doing
challenging.
it now would be there'd probably be some plug-in that you could put on the thing to do it. You know? But then that, I can't imagine he ever wanted to work in that industry again.
No, no, not at all. I have to ask you before we part ways.
Hmm.
I think that the songwriters have the stories. I've always said that. It's incredible to me when I talk to people and either a song is a concept and it's created literally within an hour or two, or some songs take up to a year. It
Mhm.
depends on the songwriter, right? It depends on the song too. Can you tell me the process for writing Dance Hall Days?
Hmm. I can, because I remember it quite well. It was during the time when we'd done the Wang Chung album, so we'd done our first UK album, and it had done okay, but it hadn't charted, and it wasn't, you know, it wasn't a commercial success, even though I think it artistically it was really very good, that record, you know. Um, so at the time I was teaching a little bit. I was like used to go to different schools on different days and teach guitar to kids like what do you call it, high school kids, you know, or slightly younger, from like 12 to 18, you know. And I was at this school in South London, and this kid didn't show up for their lesson, which was fairly normal, you know. So I had this like little 20-minute gap, and I remember the room quite clearly, actually, and the sun coming in, and the desks, and just started twizzling around on the kind of basically take your baby by the hand. That idea kind of came to me, sort of thing, you know. And I think in that 20 minutes, I probably wrote about 75% of the song, and then I kind of like sort of you then walk around with it in your head, and it starts to morph and change, and the idea of the synth bass and then the guitar chords. I think the guitar chords I came up with, you know, and the whole when are you and everyone we knew, that sort of like arpeggio section. So that was all there, but it was just the trying to get the song focused in a sense. And I remember playing it to Nick, and he was like, "Wow, this is good." And it was one of those songs where we then did a little demo of it, which is actually on Clear Like Dark Matter. Sent it to our publishers, and suddenly they were kind of like, "Yeah, we want to take you guys out for dinner," and you know, everybody started being really nice to us, you know, because in those days you could, the industry was a point where, you know, as one of the publishers said, a hit's a hit, you know, and they sort of heard the Dancehall Days was a hit record, you know. So, and we did a version of it actually, which slightly disproves what I've just said, with a producer called Tim Freeze Green, who we really liked because he was working with Talk Talk at the time, and
Mm.
really liked what he did. And he did a version of it which I really didn't like, and I thought sort of made the absolute worst of it by trying to make it quirky and kind of, you know. But then we re-recorded it with Chris Hughes and Ross Cullum, much more like the demo, but with more energy and more kind of focus. And yeah, and that was the
And then
history.
there you go.
Yeah,
History was made.
absolutely. And it still gets used in
Unbelievable.
movies and stuff, you know. So it's
Yeah.
very fortunate that it has that enduring presence. Mhm.
Yeah. It's awesome. That's awesome. All right. Before we go,
Mhm.
I ask everybody this question. Think about a moment. I call it your goosey moment. You know, when you have all the hairs on your arms stand up and you go, I cannot believe that this is happening to me. I can't believe this is my life. What is Jack Hughes's goosey moment?
I think it was playing Summerfest in Milwaukee, probably back in 2011, 12, something like that. So, you know, didn't really do anything with Wang Chung for well, almost 20 years, really, did all sorts of other things, But I remember doing the show there, and it began with a sort of maybe 300 or 400 people in this sort of tented area, but it ended up completely full, and people packed around the sides and standing outside as well. And we played Dance All Days as the last song on that particular set. And I remember the ovation that we got at the end was like deafening, like it was incredible, And I stood at the middle of the stage, right at the front, and it was a high stage, and took the applause in a way for the first time in my life, because I think through the 80s I found playing live quite difficult, and I was very self-critical, and everything was just kind of like that I was just in my head about everything, and on this occasion I thought, just they're applauding your song and you and the band, and on what you're giving to them, and yeah, I felt that exchange, and that was an incredible feeling.
That is a great Goosey moment, Jack Hughes. Thank you so much. I can't wait to see I Want My 80s tour coming to you this summer. Go to wangchung.com and find out ways to get tickets. And maybe I'll pop backstage and
Yeah,
say hello to you in
great.
July and give you a hug.
Yeah, I look forward to that. Okay.
Thanks so much, Jack. I
Bye.
appreciate it.
Good to talk with you, Meredith.
Bye-bye.
Bye.